Good afternoon and welcome. Yes. I'm wondering, James, can you just turn those overheads down just a tad? Maybe just a little bit so I can see human beings out there. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. We know there's a lot happening in the world, a lot happening inside our heads, and not all of it is pleasant. And being here, I think, will be a place that you will be glad that you chose to come for many reasons. Most of all because of the two wonderful people who are sharing their ideas with us this afternoon. And I hope this will be a conversation. We're an intimate group, so I think that we can ask lots of questions and be unafraid and offer our own insights. So before we do that, though, please do check to make sure that your cell phone is off. And while you do that, I will do a more formal introduction. This is the first in a two-part series of parallel stories, delving into the sublime and inspired by the exhibition upstairs, Sea of Ice, Echoes of the European Romantic Era. This afternoon, artist Tony de los Reyes and poet Brendan Constantine, using the exhibition as a starting point, will explore the unstable, hidden elements within the sublime, considering what they meant to artists and poets in the 19th century and positing how they might echo in our own time. No stranger to the museum, happily for us, Tony returns today for his second parallel stories, having explored the watery world with writer Samir Pandya in an earlier conversation. His work is a part of our collection and was featured in an exhibition curated by Julie Joyce in 2010 titled Chasing Moby Dick, described in one review as revealing an expansive, open-ended, and thought-provoking engagement, not only with Melville's great book, but also with the history and political identity of the United States. His recent work stems from his site-specific responses to regions along the US-Mexico border. By focusing on discrete moments within the topography, he asks us to consider those borderlands as parallel ecological systems resting in deep time, oblivious to ongoing political rhetoric. His partner on the stage this afternoon, Brendan Constantine, is a poet based in Los Angeles. His work has appeared in many standards, including Poetry, The Nation, Best American Poetry, and Poem a Day. He has had work commissioned by the Getty Museum and has received grants from the Irvine Foundation and the National Endowment of the Arts. One reviewer has written, Constantine is a master poet, illuminating the ordinary and extraordinary with his distinct voice, holding humor and heart equally. He is currently poet in residence at the Windward School, where Tony also teaches, and Brendan also teaches at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. In addition, he regularly offers classes in hospitals, prisons, shelters, and with the Alzheimer's Poetry Project. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Tony de los Reyes and Brendan Constantine as together we venture into the dark sublime.
Is that good? Is that on?
Sounds
Yes?
pretty good. How's this?
That
was a heck of an introduction.
boy,
wasn't
no
it?
kidding. So you're going to see a little bit of, we go back, way back. We met doing performance art. And I think it's funny that you're wearing a black shirt, I'm wearing a white shirt. And so, as if the universe itself is paying attention, you are definitely the yin to my yang.
Yeah, it's one of the things we didn't rehearse.
So we're here to talk about this amazing show. How many of you have seen it? You raise your hands. Oh, fantastic. The thing about the show upstairs is that, as Patsy was saying, and of course, thank you to the museum. Thank you for Patsy. This museum is such an amazing, amazing part of this world, and we're very, very honored, both of us, to be here. But the show upstairs is a particularly amazing moment where you can fall into oneself and where you can imagine yourself being in a different time and a different place, but also it feels somehow very, very personally revealing. I know that when I saw the show, I was reminded of the power of small things and how small things reveal the scale of the universe. And that's something that artists and poets in particular are very, very good at. And so we're here to celebrate those artists.
Here, here.
And some contemporary artists as well. A lot of it is taken from the show, but also we're going to move into some more contemporary work as well, especially on the poetry side. All right? All right. I'm going to ask Brendan, how do you feel about the void?
How do I feel about the void?
Yeah, the void.
Really depends on the day. Sometimes I'm absolutely ready for it. And other times it's a question of, you know what, give me 2 more days. And, I can get things together. In that same way that I always need about $500 more. And,
Yeah. My void is always in the moments between the things I think I'm doing. And it could be just even a walk from point A to point B. The void sort of rears its head and says, you're moving through time and space. Mm-hmm. The thing that you're doing is not moving through time and space. Do you know what I mean? The small things that we do, we think we're doing them, but really all we're doing is moving between other things. And so the void to me is the moment in which, as an artist, and I'm sure as a poet, that we wind up reminding ourselves that the big things are always changing and moving in flux, and our little moment in it is just but a whim.
You're making me also think of Einstein asking, when does Vienna arrive at this train?
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, that is the... So how many of you know Mr. Natural? Great. If you don't know
This is
Mr.
our crumb.
Natural from our crumb, the only reason I threw this in there is because this is a heavy subject. Patsy said the dark sublime. So I knew this was going to be dark, so I wanted to lighten it up a little bit. But one of the things for me was, as an early teenager, I don't know how I found copies of Mr. Natural, but they opened up to me a world that I already knew intuitively, living in suburbia of Los Angeles, and I realized that this notion of quest into the unknown, the void, these are all things that nobody else seemed to be paying attention to but me, and I'm sure that's not true, but it felt that way growing up in suburbia. And those moments have always stuck with me as being a kind of a prelude to being an artist. Even at the time, as a young teenager, I didn't know I was going to be an artist. So, but that's why I threw Mr. Natural in there. But the show is a really staggering collection of very, very well thought of and well thought through indicative work of the Romantic period. So we're talking about the late 18th century into the mid 19th century. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, too, it's extraordinarily well
it's
exhibited.
Really beautifully braided, if you haven't seen it. Even with its inclusion of contemporary work. And yeah, it's beautifully realized.
So I just wanted to show, so this is the work from the show that I had here that Patsy was referring to, and one of the reasons I'm assuming I was asked to be here is because I did quite a deep dive into Moby Dick and the novel as indicative of both a past and present time. Just a quick side, the reason I started spending years working with the book is because I was doing a residency in Rotterdam, and I had vowed to read Moby Dick, which everyone said, don't bother, it's a mess. And after the first
book.
Oh, it's the best book. And on the 6th page of my Penguin paperback, there was a description of Ishmael. When he didn't know what to do with the world, he said, "I need to go to sea." And of the list of things he said were always troubling were newspaper headlines, things that we were very familiar with. And there were 3 newspaper headlines. One was Bloody Battle in Afghanistan. One was contested presidency of the United States, contested election of presidency of the United States. And the third was Ishmael goes to sea. And the thing that struck me at that moment was that Melville, who wrote this book in 1850, was saying to the world that these are the predilections somehow of an American psyche. and this idea of the contested election between Bush and Gore, which had happened. And at the time, I was listening to the BBC radio of the war in Iraq and Fallujah in particular, and thinking about the bloody battle in Afghanistan. And I was thinking that this sort of circular relationship between time, space, and politics is something that was worthy of a deep dive. So I'm bringing some of that into this talk as well.
And his reaction, too, it was wonderful at that early point in the book, because it's so gotten to him. Do you remember Ishmael says that it's all he can do to keep from running out into the street and knocking people's hats off. You know, he doesn't know what to do with himself, Anyway.
So what we decided to do is that most of this talk is going to be images from the show or images surrounding the show. And then Brendan's going to read some poetry from the time period. And we were sort of going to do this little back and forth. So we're going to hear Osmandius by Shelley, by Brendan.
I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Osmandius, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
We're looking at an image of the Kreuzkirche from Dresden and the ruins of the church from the 7 Years' War. This is an amazing work on paper that speaks to us both of industry and despair, right? The idea of the ruin is something which is so important to the Romantic ideal. And if you look at this drawing, I just took this an hour ago. This is a detail from a drawing that's this big. One of the things that struck me, and this is why we have to see art in person, right? You don't believe anything on the screen, is that we're looking at a 50-50 markage between figure and ground. That we're looking at a space that's created through the quickest marks imaginable of pen and ink. And that they are equal paper and equal ink. And we are looking at ruins that somehow morph into people. And those people are doing things that are carting away rubble and approaching a kind of normalcy based on this ruin. And I don't know if the artist thought of themselves as a romantic, but it certainly is a main theme of Romanticism, which is disaster, entropy, hope, grief, all contained in one image. Do you have any thoughts about this particular drawing?
Well, it's all, you've said it beautifully. It's so much of the Romantic period seems to be given to finding one's way through what seems an absurd sort of, once you've heard yourself say, I'm going through a weird period now for the 8 millionth time, you begin to conclude that life is a series of very bizarre transitions. And this is not an original thought. This is happening, quite vividly for the Romantic artist. It becomes totally overwhelming for Chatterton, who by 1770, commits suicide. But yeah, and they are finding their way. As you said, they're finding a normalcy. Industry is everywhere. They're clearing it up and making sense of it. They're returning shapes to their expected order, you know.
Yeah, I'm quite, as you know, someone who thinks they know how to draw. I'm quite taken by this. When we were first putting this together, Brendan wanted to use this image on the left, so I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll talk about the image on the right. So you'll talk about the image on the left.
Yeah, we had an exhibition at LACMA called "Mapping the Infinite," and it incorporated, you know, efforts to do just that from culture to culture, and you know, and most impressive among, you know, in pretty much each display was the efforts to sort of visualize the infinite before there was any proof that there was such a thing. I was taken by the image from Thomas Wright on the left, particularly because it's actually amazingly prescient, even though there's a great deal of technology and information that doesn't exist in 1750. And one of the things that so struck me about it was that here he was, you know, with this idea that maybe is inspired a little bit by Kepler, who almost 100 years before that image is saying, basically, there may be other worlds, but if there are other worlds with other people on them, then that actually brings into question who is the Lord of this one, and does it even belong to us? And yet there's at the time no real evidence that there might be, you know, whole other galaxies, you know. And this was when this large treatise came out, The Original Theory or New Hypothesis of the Universe, which, by the way, you can still get copies of. You know, one of the things that so moved me about this particular plate was that while this idea of how multiple infinities might coexist with one another is now actually this idea of there being not only multiple infinities, but infinities that are somehow larger or smaller than others. You know, and physicists are actually talking about this as a possibility right now. That Thomas Wright has pretty much nailed what that might look like and how those things coexist. But at the same time, what charmed me about this is that he's still representing the stars as five-pointed little points of light. So there's still this very childish understanding of what was out there. He didn't even know what a star was at that time. Could only guess at it. And yet somehow he may have nailed it. So it fascinated me. Yeah.
The image on the right is from, this is a brand new achievement. This is the largest digital camera on the planet. And the first image, it has something like 216 separate sensors, which is all calibrated to form one image. And so apparently tomorrow is going to be the drop of the first image. And the resolution from the camera is supposed to be so, more than anything we fully understand. So we're not just going to be looking at a picture of the universe, but we're going to be looking at a detail of the universe as far as we can possibly go. So this idea of the oculus too, the idea of the eye and the orb, which the two things in which we see in both images are actually part of our concept of spherical knowledge and ocular knowledge, how we see the universe, how we understand it as a volume that's ever expanding. And I also just like the team on the right. There's so many people doing so much good work that never get seen. To me, these have to be heroes of some sort or another. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of this. Getting back to that image, because that image is in Dresden, it again, kind of going back to the chapter 1 of Moby Dick, you know, this idea of the ruins of Dresden from the Second World War immediately sprang to my mind. And the horrific, unimaginable firebombing that happened towards the end of the war. It's something that doesn't really, you know, we talk a lot about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and rightfully so, but what happened in Dresden is particularly nightmarish. I mean, particularly because Dresden was the crown jewel of, I think, the Holy Roman Empire, and that it contained so much art and so much amazing architecture. And it doesn't take much to find images of Dresden and see the horror of what happened in 1945. When I was thinking about contemporary artists in the city, I thought of Gerhard Richter, who was himself he did himself see the Dresden bombings. He was in a town called Waltensdorf, which is about 75 kilometers from Dresden itself, but he knew his grandmother was in Dresden at the time of the bombings. And he remembers seeing the glow and being so just enraptured by the glow of the distant city, but also knowing that his grandmother was there, but being too young to fully understand what was happening. And he said the sort of all of those things happening at once, when he looked back and saw these cityscapes that he made, it reminded him of what he saw during the war. And this quote by him, I think, is very apt for the Romantics in general, because we have to remember that Romanticism is something that happened after the Age of Enlightenment, after this incredible acceleration of reason and experimentation, and yet somehow there was something lacking. We began to see the dissolution of religion at that time, but this idea that perhaps art is our religion in the most fundamental sense, especially seeing the talk before today at noon, listening to the artist describe the incoherence in which she operated when it comes to making work, something I share and perhaps something you share when it comes to creation. You're working out of an unknown, that is a kind of religious experience, not in any scaffolded sense, but in a kind of weirdly miasmic sense, right?
And also the sense, and I know there's artists in this room, and there's that sense quite often in the heat of creation, where you have less of a sense that you're making something, and more of a sense that you are remembering something, that you're merely bringing into existence something that already exists for you in some fashion, but it doesn't necessarily have the sense that it was something that you created. Eloise Klein-Healy, a poet I admire, says that the question for her was never whether art imitated life or that life imitated art, but that both were in fact a response to the same unnameable third thing. And somewhere in there is my understanding of this particular relationship. And then prior to this, Wallace Stevens has a great lecture that you can download online from 1951 on the relationship between poetry and painting. And he says that of the art forms, those are the two most closely related. And there's a moment, we were talking about this just before the talk, he says in that lecture, the paramount relation between poetry and painting today, between modern man and modern art, is simply this, that in an age in which disbelief is so profoundly prevalent, or if not disbelief, indifference to questions of belief, poetry and painting and the arts in general are in their measure a compensation for what has been lost. And I don't know that it's necessarily the suggestion that God had necessarily vanished, but that it was an effort toward understanding the shape of God. And anyway.
Absolutely. Image from the Dresden firebombs and taken from the American Air Force. A lot of fighter pilots and bomber pilots discuss this strange disembodiment of knowing what they're doing but seeing what they're seeing, and we will have to make do with just their remembrances. But it's something we can only imagine. We can't imagine what was going through their minds. This brought to my mind another artist who was also involved with the Second World War, Via Selmans, who escaped Latvia, wound up in Germany, and then wound up in the United States. But she was only 5 or 6 during that time. And as a result, again, she's working through memory but also as a way to attach herself to her place in time, what she sees as what's around her, but also what she sees as part of her past. So we have to discuss this most famous of all romantic paintings, which isn't in the show, but there is a wonderful Friedrich in the show, so just amazing. And because this painting is so iconic, it leads us into a conversation about how are we capable of being romantic now? And I've sort of come down on the side of no. I don't think we can be romantic. Not in the true sense of the word. And the question becomes why? And a lot of it has to do with photography. A lot of it has to do especially with the phone. The introduction of the phone as a kind of buffer against true romantic feelings, I think, is something we all have felt. I think the moment we've been served a plate of food that looks absolutely gorgeous and we want to take a picture of it is a moment that we move away from the romantic. We don't sit there, we don't smell it, we don't savor it, we don't ogle it. Mm-hmm. We wind up consuming it as a commodity, as a sort of digital fetish.
Not to mention the oversimplification of something that should never have been simple. And sacrificing. It's funny. There's a moment. I think it's in the Andalusian Dog, where there's a moment where there's a man on a sidewalk and he's looking into his bare hand on the street, and just the fact that he is standing there doing this in the middle of the street is to be regarded as an insane thing to do. And when Buñuel's camera comes around to see what he's in fact looking at, he's looking at ants crawling out of a hole in his hand. And I remember that image stayed with me because after I was given a cell phone, my publisher insisted that I have one so that they could find me. Somebody sent me an app that was a game, and the game was ants crawling across the screen so that you could kill them with your thumb. And I thought, oh my God, we're there, and something huge was just lost in this moment,
I think we can all understand this image, right? I think we've all been this person. And in fact, there's an amazing Instagram account. It's been around for a while called Insta Reel. And what it is this remarkable thing that started to happen several years ago, which was that everybody seemed to be taking the same photograph. That it wasn't just one person doing one photograph. It was people who didn't know each other taking the same photograph based on a kind of, Jungian thing of communication that was sort of etched in our psyche as we need to take this photograph this way in this place. Mm-hmm. This is how you do it. And what the signifiers of the hat, right? The idea of sort of occluding the face and the long hair and the vistas and the sort of casualness and awe, all of it sort of into kind of a mush of romanticism that has no contour but just a kind of vibe is one of, I think, the things we need to move away from, is the vibe of romanticism. All right.
A tour de force. I got a book and can't make myself read it, even though my lover swears it's good, even though the cover says we might all beautifully belong somewhere. Imagine if everything you saw was printed inside your skull, where people could see it after you died. When you do a lot of cocaine, it feels like that's true. Like the gallery is struggling to stay open because pipes keep breaking and the floor is always wet. That's what I remember, anyway. It's been a while since I had enough money to be that beautiful and echoing. Of course, you can't find anything in my head that looks like a sunset or a toy horse. It's all just goo in there. That's what memories become, dark water and milk. You could no more read it back then you could drink the ink from a novel and know who loved who.
So in trying to attach images and poems, I was particularly drawn by drawn to this drawing of I never know how to pronounce his name, Fuseli? This is the great Swiss romantic artist, but the sort of the countenance on his face. Yeah, and one of the things that it says in the didactic upstairs is that the Transtibertines believed that they were the true descendants of ancient Rome. And this is quite evident in this face, which you could easily see as a Roman bust, right, of a philosopher or a senator or maybe a emperor. And there's some wonderful faces in the exhibition, and I put these together because I feel like, to some degree, the romantic male falls into kind of stereotypes and categories of, on the left, the sort of slightly peevish, hermetic, pretty boy who is to die for. And the handsome, swaggering, virtuosic fighter.
With the 1,000-yard stare.
With the 1,000-yard stare. Yes, the Pedro Pascal versus the Robert Pattinson. I was going to put a picture of Robert Pattinson up there because I think he's very much of the left.
But we removed it for time.
Yeah. What's interesting is the piece on the right is very small. It's about this big. It's tiny, and it's so delicately painted, and the reflections in the cornea, and the lovely little twist of the kerchief, or whatever you call that, the necktie. And the tousled hair. It's all about somebody who is maybe was just awoken from a romantic reverie, but is looking at you with his, like, you want to join me in this walk? Whereas the other one is sort of categorically looking at you and saying, are you worthy of me? And it's sort of I find that there are two very romantic impulses that, perhaps we're projecting that, but it certainly is part of our culture to think in those terms. I think for a time we're not going to show the video, but there is a particularly moving video upstairs that's only 7 minutes long, so please see it. One of the things that is so amazing about it is this traditional trope of scale that happens in Romanticism, of the infinite world of landscape and the universe pitted against one person's enterprise of being. And this little zodiac boat moves very slowly, comes in from the right, and then moves towards the center of the frame, and then slowly moves in a spiral outward until it's out of frame, and then it disappears. And of course, all the while, there's this circular activity, like our spiral nebula, and then it dissipates, much as like our spiral nebula will do at some point. This idea of how to contextualize action and time and its ultimate relevance and irrelevance is such at the heart of the romantic enterprise, and I think that's why it was included in the show.
And very much an embodiment of what Tony was talking about at the very beginning of that illusion that you were doing things in your life, and actually that it is all in fact happening. And there's no way, I mean, if you're going to watch this video, and I highly recommend that you do, you're going to be in this moment. And all that's happening is this moment. And any subtleties that you detect, the movement of the water, the mist, the change in and consistency of the glacier beyond and everything. If you're noticing something and going, am I supposed to be looking at this? Yes, you are. Anywhere your eye goes at this moment, you are absolutely supposed to be in that stillness. It's really quite wonderful.
And part of the beauty of the piece, too, which makes it very contemporary, is it's not done in silence. It's not done just with ambient sounds. It's actually, you hear the audio of the artists themselves directing the boat. So the artist becomes in some way a a fabulous stand-in for God as the prime motivator. And I think there's a bit of fun in it, but it's still epic nonetheless.
This is a joy. This poet was my friend. The leaving. My father said I could not do it, but all night I picked the peaches. The orchard was still, the canals ran steadily. I was a girl then, my chest its own walled garden. How many ladders to gather an orchard? I had only one, and a long patience with lit hands and the looking of the stars, which moved right through me the way the water moved through the canals with a voice that seemed to speak of this moonless gathering and those who had gathered before me. I put the peaches in the pond's cold water, all night up the ladder and down, all night my hands twisting fruit as if I were entering 1,000 doors. All night my back a straight road to the sky. And then out of its own goodness, out of the far fields of the stars, the morning came, and inside me was the stillness a bell possesses, just after it has been rung, before the metal begins to long again for the clapper's stroke. The light came over the orchard, the canals were silver, and then were not. And the pond was, I could see as I laid the last peach in the water, full of fish and eyes. This is part 2 of Bread and Wine. The kindness of exalted night is wonderful, and no one knows where she comes from or what will emerge from her. Thus she moves the world and the hopeful minds of humans. Not even a sage knows what she is up to. The highest God, who loves you very much, wants it so. Therefore you prefer reasonable day to the night. But occasionally a clear eye loves the shadows as well and tries to sleep just for pleasure before it's necessary, or a brave person likes to gaze directly into the night. Surely it's right to dedicate wreaths and songs to her, since she is holy to lunatics and dead men, although she herself exists totally free in spirit forever. But she must grant us oblivion and holy drunkenness, that in the hesitating interval, in the darkness, there'll be something for us to hold on to. She must grant us flowing words, sleepless as lovers are, and a fuller cup, and a bolder life, and holy remembrance as well, to stay wakeful at night.
What's amazing about those last 2 poems is that this one, the Hodelen, is from, 18 something, 16?
Yeah, the Holderlin is mid 19th century. And then Bridget Begin Kelly's poem is about 1993, 94. And very much the same exaltation, don't you think? Yeah. Bridget, if you don't know the work of Bridget Begin Kelly, we lost her a few years back, and she was a friend of mine and a very respected poet who taught over at the University of Urbana-Champaign. And while we had her, I walked around telling anybody who would stand still that she was the finest poet writing in our language at that time. And there are, thankfully, anthologies of her work, and I highly recommend that you check her out. She will break your heart, hide it for 6 months, and make you glad of it. She was...
We just have a few more slides left, but I felt we had to talk about luminosity. And following the last image, there's something about, let's just go back. There's something about this type of light that can happen under a full moon. It obviously happens in twilight or around sunrise. This idea of the transitional moment of the day, which, again, is easily very Instagrammable. But at the same time, I feel like I've never lost touch with it as being a place for my countenance to sort of rest in the full understanding that time is on my side. And I don't mean that it's rooting for me.
Not at all. No, I hear you.
As I get older, it's certainly not rooting for me, but it is there for me. And I think that is something that the Romantics, even the young Robert Pattinson's of Chatterton, by the way, was so engrossed, apparently, I don't know if this is a myth, so engrossed in a poem at age 19, or writing or something, that he fell into an open grave.
It was just before that. He didn't live to be 19, believe it or not.
Oh, okay. That's right. He died at 19. But they thought it might have happened because he fell into a
he was
grave.
so engrossed.
But the thing about the luminosity is that it seems to touch us in a way that full night or full sunshine doesn't. Like, sun can beat your skin and you can feel it. But these types of moments during the day move through us and circle around behind us and move us back towards ourselves. I'm speaking just personally, but I as someone who is a sailor, love to sail those times of days because the water itself seems to change. It seems to be less less insistent. It seems to kind of relax a little bit. So this is a little corny what I'm going to do, but that's okay. One of the things that Robert Rosenblum wrote about in his book on Northern Romanticism is that it fed into modernism with several artists. And no artist, I think, was more of a romantic than Mark Rothko. And for those of you that have spent time with his work, I think he allows us to move back into ourselves through the perception of luminosity. That it's a kind of weird phenomena that reminds us that we're not looking at a painting as so much as we're looking at ourselves. We're looking at ourselves looking. I find it fascinating that most Rothko paintings are overly lit. He himself really professed a deeper desire to have a dimly lit room. And he also professed that one should stand right up to his paintings.
We tend to want to step back and take the whole thing in. He actually would love it if the boundaries of the painting would meet with the boundaries of your sight, so that you were in the center of the piece.
And I'm not sure, again, he committed suicide. I think he was completely, profoundly upset that pop art had supplanted some of the things that he was trying to do. But they're nonetheless here for us in the same way that all the work upstairs is here for us, and it doesn't rest, right? The artist leaves, but the work remains, and as such, we will move into our last reading.
Harping. How have I walked so far? Filled so many hats with leaves to find a forest where no leaves fall, where each new page grows out upon the last and the boughs lay down like the arms of cloaks in a cloakroom. The wind speaks up, loses its way, starts over. I drop my arms too and think silly thoughts about prayer. How have I slept so long that I'm this awake? I've so much reading to do, and for once I'm up to it, starting with the nearest branch. With bread and a lantern, I could read into the night. With no lantern, I could be night, dreaming aloud for each tree. When was it I decided to stay poor? Poor as a library, so I could walk like this? Where did I set my hat? The smell of mud, of books wasting in the mud, sweetens into something like straw. It's a red smell, but not urgent. Nothing's urgent here, certainly not these questions. I ask them because even the mouse has a song, and the mockingbird mocks it openly, and the river tends to digress, and hangers chime in a cloakroom. This is the sound the air makes with me.
So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. We're happy to answer any questions. If any of you have any thoughts about this, I'd love to hear your experience of what we've talked about or the show, anything.
Yes.
I'm fascinated with ruins, and traditionally ruins are a great part of the sublime, implying the passage of time, whatever. When you look at contemporary news photographs about ruins, be it Gaza, Ukraine, whatever, there's a difference in the approach. How do you describe that difference?
Well, you've got my head going. If anybody's got their phone out, I highly recommend that you look up a poem by Billy Collins called Building with Its Face Blown Off. And he wrote it particularly because it was a picture he realized he'd been seeing over and over and over again since he was a child. Always a new building, and always with many of the same conclusions from it. The first poem we heard today, of course, Osmandius, is all about a ruin. And it is the image that is so important. For anybody here who's going to get their MFA in poetry, here's the $30,000 piece of advice. You tend to think that it's the beginning of the piece of art, and here's where writing and painting really intersect, I think, in a lot of ways. We always think it's the beginning that's difficult to execute, when really it's the closer that matters. As Ralph Angel said, the hardest part of a poem is how the hell do I get out of it? And here's the piece of advice. The last image, the last picture that you put, the last metaphor that you put in the reader's face will be the filter through which the entire piece is drawn. There's nothing you can do about it. The poet and the painter can give you information, but they're really interested in feeling. And feeling comes before everything else. Wittgenstein says that poets are not interested in the information game of language. It is feeling that transcends everything. And the poet has noticed that that last picture will change the nature of everything that came before it. That same principle of retrocausality that they were so excited about at the University of Chicago 3 years ago was something poets and painters had always known, that the ending would change everything. If Shelley had only wanted to make a statement about hubris and the hubris of power, then his poem ended at the line, "Nothing beside remains." But because it is feeling, because he needs us to be staring at the ruin as you have stared and puzzled at the ruin, and that the image was everything, that's why round the decay of this colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. And as soon as you finish that poem and close the book and put it on the shelf, something is still happening, and you are still moving across the sand. He has to strike a bell note at the end of it if he's going to get anything like what... Because, of course, for you and I, looking at that ruin, if it's the ruin that we find romantic, it has struck a kind of bell note that we might fall in love with and go, because we love wondering about it and the time that has passed. We look at the ruin on the news, and there's going to be fresh pictures by tomorrow, are there not, of Natanz. And that is a very different bell note. And that one is much more troubling. And that one seems to be something that is ongoing in a different way. It's going to lead to more ruins. And Osmandius is not. I don't know. That's my immediate impression.
Yeah, I'm going to say something less poetic, but I feel that it's all about distance, right? We don't lament the ruins of the 7 Years' War. We don't think of it as like, oh my God, what a tragedy. I don't look at that drawing and see the untold populations that were killed and the displacement of people. But it is similar to what's happening now. It's just that we can't imagine it. The images that I assume you're talking about are images that we can fully imagine. And we could be there.
Here.
And that's why I forget which artist said that, after the images of the photographs of the camps that the U.S. Army took of the survivors of some of these death camps, that no one could paint a human figure anymore. And of course, we know that's not true. Part of this reclamation, I think that we saw, that I was trying to infer in the ruins itself, that one drawing, the close-up, was that human beings have an amazing capacity to forget. And the forgetting doesn't happen in the immediacy of the news image. It's certainly modulated and it's certainly dampened, which is tragic. But it is nonetheless something that we know we will eventually forget, which is part of our problem, right?
Yes, hi. That's you with your glasses up there.
Thank you. And the Rothko really intrigued me that you put this with the rest. Because it is abstract, and I have always walked inside of them, as you mentioned, and felt profoundly something. So the feeling was always the power. And I don't understand how that occurs.
I was going to make a point between these two images, is that Friedrich and Silva and all other artists who painted these type of seascapes, you have to remember that the Maritimes that were painted before, the Dutch Maritimes especially, were of kind of the industrious merchant ship in the storm, right? There was a lot of globetrotting and commerce. So the ship was something that was about our ability to take over the ocean itself. But you start to see the ship at harbor, and the masts become obvious metaphors for the crucifix. And one thing we don't really talk about enough with Rothko is that for all of his horizontality of the forms, there is an enormous importance of the verticality of the canvas. And so if you look at a lot of his work, you'll see a preponderance towards a horizontal form that's in kind of a proportion to the vertical scale of the painting. And that axis, this is, every culture on earth has this. And it is somehow embedded in us as an understanding of the infinite and
the vanishing point.
Yeah, the
is
vanishing
intersection.
point. Yeah. Different than the spiral. And
Very much so.
The spiral is also something that occurs more in nature, right, than this type of axis. But humans, I think, have really connected to this idea of that horizontality and verticality.
Hello again.
A friend of mine who's a Catholic priest loves the Rothko Chapel in Houston, but he also said, I can imagine myself doing a Good Friday service, but I would have great difficulty doing the Easter service.
That's a good priest. that's a good, keep that one. That's a good priest. No, I think my first experience at Rothko Chapel I found it very ludicrous. I found it actually kind of a blasphemy of his own work, because it felt like he had gone a bridge too far. He had kind of dipped into his own opium and wound up going a little bit too much.
I don't know. Do you remember when the Inside Van Gogh experience was going around, and it was sort of a digital environment where you would go inside Van Gogh paintings and whatnot? And I remember my girlfriend Julia and I were saying, there really ought to be the Inside Rothko experience. It would be one color, but boy, would you be in it, and you'd have to go to another room to get to the rest of the painting, and it'd be... And I thought that's the one that should be immersive, but anyway. Inside Motherwell, I don't.
Yeah, Inside Motherwell would be great. Yeah, that'd be a good one. Yeah,
Come out blind, but it would be great. Like,
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Yes.
I wonder if you both might speak to the idea of this bell note, which really intrigued me when you spoke of it. But both in painting and in poetry, its importance in our lives, this lingering and deepening into the experience of actually being here. And what creates that in your...
What creates the reaction to it, or what is the? Well, I think that there are all kinds of rhythms that we're ignorant of that are in our own bodies that are happening all the time. I think we are some sort of reptilian consciousness understands a kind of breathing of the body all the time. Like we understand our breathing, we understand our heartbeat, but I think somewhere inside of us is also an acknowledgement of all of the cells and all of the molecules moving. And I think that when we are situated next to something that propels us into a reawakening of that, even on its most primal level, I think that's the thing where it comes from. And as an artist who's always looking for a way to depict and have an audience experience that, there is no tangible road towards that. In the same way that I couldn't begin to tell you what my body's doing right now, except maybe I'm a little hungry.
I have a slightly, I don't know, it might be the same thing, only different. I'm going to try to say this concisely and not go on and on and on about it. I do think, though, that there's, that the concise answer, when it comes to our lives, is actually something that we'll never be really satisfied with because we don't really believe there's going to be an answer that's going to stay still. And where I think a lot of artists, particularly painters and poets, have recognized that bell note feels much more authentic. And it allows us, well, first of all, it allows us to revisit the work of art and go back and have the experience again. Poetry begins from culture to culture with the same sort of problem. And it's that after a culture has gotten a language up and running for a while, the people within that culture realize that language falls short of saying some very necessary things. It falls short of saying something that we believe deep down may be unsayable. And so people begin to invent wildly with that language. They may decide that they need a special way to talk about special things. And so they may use only their most sacred words or their most beautiful words, or they will give it a rhythm and a cadence of some kind. They may deliberately misuse that language for the purpose of a greater communion. And interestingly enough, once the poet has said it, curiously enough, for us, it will have remained unsaid. And if I want to write a poem about Ukraine right now, if I end my poem on, "So war is bad," well, that's a poem you can forget about immediately. I've tied it up with a bow, and you are no more likely to revisit that poem than you are to work the same crossword puzzle the second time. It's not going to happen. But I think of a poet I admire named Guante who said, "Don't tell me there's a war. Show me your brother's empty room." Now you and I can begin to communicate on a much higher level. Now the experience feels much more authentic. The bell note is ringing, even when I put the book down. The bell note is ringing in the painting of the brother's empty room, and I walk out of the gallery and I'm still feeling it, and the more mysterious I make the world, the more it will seem like the world. You know what I mean? And then it's like that. I feel like I've had a sense that I've gotten closer to the truth than I would have with a declarative sentence. Anyways, that's my
Yes.
take.
That's an applause worthy. Ditto. Oh, I think that's good. Any other thoughts?
There's a raffle as well.
Yeah. That's right. Brendan does have some poetry poetry books in the back, so I would love you to take a look at those. And I actually
And
have
some of your work is available.
yes. But really, thank you to the museum.
Thank you very much for
Thank
making us
you
so welcome,
for
everybody.
allowing us to be
It's been
here.
a lovely
We really
time.
appreciate it.